Hi all, I'm Rosalina and with me is Charlotte. Together we're going to be talking about why we're pro-choice and what it means to us. We both have personal experiences, different reasons, but both equally as important.
As you might know, we are part of the No More Shame, an organisation which aims to tackle shame and stigma in regards to the women's reproductive rights, amongst many other things.
You haven't been able to browse the internet in Gibraltar in the last year without coming across an abortion debate on any of the Gibraltar sites. And whatever side of the fence that you're on, it's a topic that is quite obvious we can't ignore. And while everybody is invested in this debate, I think it's time that we consider the emotional toll and the state of mind of the women who have been through terminations, and even the women who are thinking about that decision right now as we speak. Feeling judged and ashamed because of the stigma attached to abortion, women in Gibraltar have been crossing the border for many, many years into Spain, where they aren't offered any means of support when they go to the clinics and have a termination, before or after care, or even a follow-up appointment. This is the care that we believe women deserve here at home in Gibraltar.
One of the issues we'd like to address in this argument used by the pro-life movements that should abortion be legalised in Gibraltar, it would be advocating for abortion on demand, which in turn means that women would consider abortion as an easy way out, instead of using contraception or abstaining. Other than the fact that there is no evidence to back this claim, the fact that is the statistics prove in places where abortion is legalised, there are less abortions happening. The reason being that legalising terminations, a system is put in place to help support women who might be considering making the choice to terminate. This includes better sex education, easier access to contraception, better counselling services and much better support, whatever choice a woman makes.
Without legal abortions, it is suggested that any woman who has sexual relations is morally obliged to bear a child, whether they are equipped to do so financially, emotionally, or mentally. Most people regard the right to control their own body as a moral right, no questions and no need for permissions. If women are not allowed to abort an unwanted fetus, then they are being deprived of this right. And without this right, they do not have the same moral status as men. Women need access to abortion in order to achieve full political, social, and economic equality with men. In fact, women need the right to abortion just to have the same freedoms as men.
A pregnancy to a woman is perhaps one of the most determinative aspects of her life. It disrupts her body in many, many different ways. Pregnancy isn't always plain sailing, and complications are common, illnesses too, which could put a woman's life at risk. It disrupts her education should she get pregnant during her teenage years. If the law won't allow a teenager to adopt a child, you have to be over 21. Then why are we expecting young girls to continue a pregnancy and bring a child in, even if she wishes not to do so?
It disrupts her employment. Women in the workplace often miss out on promotions, on ways to further their career due to being childbearing, especially if they're childbearing age. If women have the right to choose whether or not to have children, then they can achieve equality with men. Men don't get pregnant, so then they're not restricted in the same way women are. And it often disrupts her entire family life. If a woman is not allowed to have an abortion, she is not only forced to carry the child to term, but also expected by society to support and look after the child for many, many years. Putting up a child for adoption, especially here in Gibraltar, it's not easy to access, and it does bring its own stigmas and judgments along with it.
Which is what we have both experienced, a pregnancy which, if continued, could jeopardise our family life as we knew it. Both experiences were different. One pregnancy life-threatening medically, and one pregnancy would have forced one of us to continue in an abusive relationship, therefore putting children we both already had at risk.
So mine. I was married to a man who was both emotionally and physically abusive. I had my first child at 21 and my second child at 24. The abuse continued throughout the pregnancy, and in some aspects it even got worse. He wasn't a very paternal person, so I was practically a single mother in a relationship that I didn't want to be in, and it was ruining my life. Any sexual relations were forced by him. So when I fell pregnant for the third time, my second son was just a year old, and I was completely devastated. I was already suffering with depression, sleep deprivation, and I was actually trying to find an active way to leave my partner. He knew this, so when I actually told him about the pregnancy, he was quite happy about it. If anybody knows anything about abusive relationships, you'll know that maintaining that control over the survivor, the victim, is very, very important. So he knew that if I was to go through with this pregnancy, where was I going to go with 3 children on my own? But I was adamant that I couldn't have the child. I felt trapped. I did not want to be tied anymore to this man already. So yeah, I decided that I needed to terminate. I did not know what the procedure entailed at the time, and in fact it wasn't only until last year that I even knew that abortions were illegal in Gib. I just actually thought it was just something you did, you went over to Spain, it was done, but I did know that it was shameful, that it wasn't something that you spoke about, it wasn't something you admitted, so I kept quiet about it. The procedure, I'm talking about 10 years ago, from what I can tell, a lot of things have changed, but the procedure was not nice. They didn't seem to really care about what I was going through. They were just there to do a job. So after the procedure, I went home and I was on my own. I knew that I couldn't tell anybody about it, and I knew that it wasn't something that I could talk about with anybody. So I decided to go online, and I found some support groups, and it was really, really helpful. But still, I needed something else. I needed counseling. I needed support that I knew was not available in Gib. But the point I'm trying to make is that I don't feel guilty for terminating a pregnancy. I truly believe that when you're at a crossroads, you should have that choice to put yourself first and to put the children that you already have first. So I know I made the right decision. For many, it's not the right decision, and it's not easy. But the majority of the time, when a woman goes through a termination, it is for the right reasons.
Back in 2011, I found out I was pregnant, and even though I was apprehensive due to my medical condition, I was happy to be having another baby. So as all women do, I went to see my GP within the MOD to make her aware and to start the necessary medical care. Having previously been diagnosed with thyroid cancer, undergone a partial thyroidectomy, requiring medication for life and regular checkups, I was aware that I was going to have to be monitored closer than I had in previous pregnancies to ensure my thyroid levels were at their optimum. It was whilst attending these appointments that it was discovered there was an issue with my blood work. I was then required to have chest X-ray, ultrasound scan of the remaining part of the thyroid. With all the results of these tests, I was sent back to my consultant in Birmingham. Whilst there, I was informed the cancer had returned for a second time. Now, anyone who has received the diagnosis of cancer might agree with me. When you hear those words, your whole head starts to spin. You can hear the doctor in front of you talking, but your brain doesn't quite make sense of the words. It's a little like having your head underwater. Now imagine hearing those words, knowing you were pregnant. My whole world crashed in around me. I was devastated. My consultant explained all my options to me. I could continue and risk the cancer growing at a greater rate due to the pregnancy hormones. This could have been detrimental to my health, and likelihood it would have been life-threatening as the cancer had the potential to spread, or I could terminate. The decision was difficult yet easy at the same time. I had to think of the 2 children I had and how could I potentially leave them without a mother. I had a very supportive family around me in Birmingham who agreed that this was the best thing for the circumstances. It was based upon all the information I had been given that I made the personal choice to have a termination. I was referred to BPAS, which is the British Medical Advisory Service. There I was given information regarding the different methods which were available to me. I opted for a surgical procedure as I didn't feel comfortable with the medical procedure, the idea that I may bleed on my journey home. I was booked in for a few days later. On the day of the procedure, I attended the clinic. It was an old Victorian house which had been converted. I was made to feel at ease. I was given plenty of information. I was made aware I could change my mind at any point. But this is something I knew I needed to do. So I walked into the anaesthetic room where I lay on the bed and was given the anaesthesia. That is the last I remember until I woke up when it was all over, where I was sat up in bed being monitored. Once my observations were all satisfactory and had passed urine, and the effects of the anaesthesia had worn off enough, I could go home. Thankfully, my family are from Birmingham, so I went home to my dad's house. Had this not have been the case, I would have had to go to a hotel. I then went on to have the second surgery to remove the cancer. I found out, in fact, the cancer had started to spread to the parathyroid. A few weeks after the surgery, I went on to have radioactive iodine treatment. This is not a decision I have come to regret, as I feel I did what was best for the children I already had and for myself. If I had have continued with this pregnancy, I may not be here with my children. I wouldn't have gone on to train to become a registered nurse, and I wouldn't be here today to tell you my story after being given the all clear from just a few months ago that I'm now officially cancer-free.
If anybody believes that having an abortion is avoiding responsibility, that to me sounds like a woman's role and purpose is being dictated, which leaves me to believe that it has more to do with judging a woman's behaviour and nothing to do with the value of life.
In answer to statements put forward about how women can avoid a termination by not getting pregnant in the first place, well, I say this: contraception fails. Women are in abusive relationships where they are forced to have sexual relations with their partner. Women are raped. Girls are raped. Young girls might not have the access to proper sex education or contraception.
And every woman is entitled to be free of any constraint which would keep them from moving forward in their life. No woman can call herself free until she can choose consciously whether she will or will not be a mother at any time of her life.
I see no arguments where responsibility is being put on the man who impregnates a woman, a man who refuses to wear a condom or forces himself upon a woman, which leads me to repeat, this whole debate is about judging and restricting women and their human rights. The constraint is imposed on the beliefs that the fetus has the right to life from the moment of conception.
I've made my opinion quite known in the debates recently, and today I want to reiterate all I have previously said, which is that while some will argue that both life matters equally, after listening to our stories, I think anyone could say that our lives at that point mattered more. Women's lives matter more. And a woman... You know, a woman who is already grown up, she has an established life, she's loved, she's a mother to children, possibly already. I think it's quite clear.
This argument reminds us that we should regard the woman as a person and not just as a container for the fetus. We should therefore give great consideration to her rights and needs first and foremost.
Thank you.
I'm a mother of 8 children, and my eldest son was diagnosed with leukemia at the age of 2. It was after 3 months of misdiagnosis, and as you can imagine, it was the worst news you could ever feel as a parent. We had been sent to Birmingham Hospital in September 2002 on suspected arthritis, and they arranged a blood test that evening. Within an hour, he was diagnosed with leukemia and rushed down to Great Ormond Street Hospital because they said a delay would be dangerous. His symptoms started in May 2002 with a limp. He couldn't walk and got increasingly less able to move. By the August, he couldn't walk the half metre from the sofa to the coffee table, and I would carry him everywhere. He would scream at night, and he wouldn't let me hug him, which I later realised was from the pain, because the leukemia cells compress the bone marrow out. It was a very hard time of constant hospital appointments fighting for him to be diagnosed. But a mother's instinct is always true, and I knew I had to be persistent. It was a blur. We were in the playroom in Goth, and Tino was playing with his sister Bella, who was 1 at the time. I felt dead inside. What do you imagine when you think of children with leukemia? Bald heads, attached to drips, very pale. I thought he was going to die. I was distraught. Walking down that corridor in the Lion Ward was the longest walk of my life. To the left and to the right, there were children, all fighting cancer, with cancer diagnosis. Some of them laying down, some of them sitting, but there was an air of uncertainty and acceptance. These children are strong. They are heroes. They take everything in their stride and deal with it without complaint. Tino didn't want me to leave his side and clung to me. I was devastated, and I wanted to stay by his side also. I didn't eat and I didn't sleep because I had a lump in my heart. He worried about me. The first time he went to have a bone marrow, I collapsed. As he was wheeled into the room. My body couldn't cope. I was strong when he was awake, and when he wasn't, I couldn't stay held together because he wasn't depending on me. An eggshell can hold up to 100 pounds of pressure. It's only when the tensile stress reaches to a certain point that it breaks. That is what it feels like when you're a parent of a child with cancer. You withhold and you withhold until that stress breaks and you fall apart. And then you get up and you do it all over again. The chemo is really strong, and the oncologists don't like to insert a central line within the first 28 days, as there's a big risk of infection. However, his veins were so small that they kept collapsing. He would have to attend the treatment room at the end of the Lion Ward and get his veins accessed regularly. One vein kept collapsing. He was crying one day he was there for 45 minutes while the nurse was trying to access his veins and put in a central line early. It's a line that just goes under the skin and directly to the artery in the heart. After all the trauma, he was allowed to choose a treat out of the treasure box. He chose stickers for his little sister. The thing with leukemia treatment is it lasts for 3 years for boys. There are 3 long, intense blocks of chemo with a small recovery time in between for the body's cells to repair themselves, and another two years of oral chemotherapy. It made him sick. It made him bleed. It made him weak. His taste buds changed. He lost sensation in his limbs, lost his hair, and the steroids changed his personality. He was allergic to the antibiotics, and he had to have anti-allergens to stop him swelling. It was never ending. The chemo burned and pushed him to the brink that his little body could take, and then they introduced the maintenance, which was at a lower level so the cells could repair. As the time was so long, they were allowed to go home after the first month. The problem is, We are from Gibraltar. We're 1,000 miles away from home. Other families would travel into London 3 or 4 times a week, have their treatment, their chemo or their operation, and then they would go home back to their comfortable environment. We couldn't do that. As we were unaware of his eventual diagnosis, we had no accommodation. We took enough clothes for 3 to 5 days and enough money for 3 to 5 days. Bear in mind that this was 16 years ago and there was no cash cards. At that time, sponsored patients weren't helping patients with accommodation. They would reimburse a calculated sum depending on your circumstances, and it was left up to you. This is all very well for a short period of time, but for when you're there for a long time, it was devastating. When we were told we had to leave the safety of the hospital, we had nowhere to go. It was September in London, and there was nothing reasonably priced. Tino's dad spent 4 days in the hospital lobby ringing round short-let appointments and cheap hotels trying to find somewhere for us. 4 whole days. Kelpe House refused to take us in, as I had a little girl and they have a no-child policy. We tried again and again in desperation, but the manager refused point blank. It had been our only hope. I felt like I had 2 options at that point. I could fly back home to Gibraltar and forego his chemotherapy treatment, or we could sleep on the streets in London. I was saved by a family in Great Ormond Street Hospital who had a son with non-Hodgkin's lymphoma, and he was allowed to stay in because it was a long block. His dad would stay with him in the ward, and his mother stayed in Barking and commuted every day. One night, when Tino was asleep, and I was on the floor of the corridor crying my eyes out, he approached me and he said he would rent me out a room in his house. We had no other choice. We were extremely grateful. On the day that Tino was released, Sebastian flew home to Gibraltar, back to his job. He was worried that we wouldn't be able to eat. I was left alone in London with a son with a terminal illness, a baby, and my double buggy. If you are not strong, at that point, you shrivel up and die. But with a child who has cancer, that is not even an option. You survive, and every night you fall apart. Then, in the morning, you have to stand up and you have to do it all over again. It takes your life like a fungus. Everything centres around this illness. He would have weekly blood checks, adjust his chemo around the results. The aim was to keep the levels at a point where it suppressed his cells so they would not reproduce, but would not suppress them to a level he would not be able to fight out the illness. Tino struggled. He was sensitive to the chemo and was in and out of hospital. He spent 3 years back and forth from the UK after he kept getting ill. On some occasions, he got really ill. One, when he got an infection in his central line and had to have it replaced. One, where he got slap cheek syndrome, which is a normal mild childhood illness, but it buried itself deep into his bone marrow and it devastated his blood counts. The last one, he got a fungal nodule in his lung, which mimicked the leukemia symptoms. They did a lung aspirate and diagnosed the fungal infection. The infection was life-threatening as he was immunosuppressed, and at this stage, they pulled him off the chemo early. Apart from the illness, one of the hardest things to deal with as a parent is the finance. You would give your life for your child, but having financial instability makes it so much harder. We had long periods where we couldn't work and we had to fly back and forth from the UK, and the GHA paid for him and myself, but it wouldn't pay for my daughter or my partner. We had an allowance, but it was nowhere near enough to cover my expenses in London and my expenses here and the journey back and forth in between. We racked up thousands of pounds worth of debt, and eventually we had to sell our flat to pay it off. We lost our home. We lost 3 years of our life, and we almost lost our son. When you hear of a child with cancer in Gibraltar, you feel it in your heart. And deep down, you're glad it's not your child. And when you go to bed, you hug them a little tighter. What happens if it is your child? It can happen to you. The last thing you want to be worried about in that time you are fighting to survive and you're fighting for your child's life is financial problems. We can't let it happen. What sort of a society allows this to happen? Leave from here and remember that your shell is tough. Your shell is tough. You think you are strong and you have withhold pressure in your life. But imagine the amount of pressure that a parent with a child with cancer and financial difficulties because of it will face. My son is a superhero, and I think I'm a little bit of a hero too. Thank you for listening to my story.
Hello, everyone. Well, today, as you can see, it says, what is Montessori? Montessori is an educational system. Do bear with me, okay? Never been in front of so many people. Right. An educational system founded in the 1900s by Dr. Maria Montessori, born in Italy in 1870. First ever female to enter medical school in Italy, role model for women, physician and educator best known for the philosophy of education that bears her name and her writing in scientific pedagogy. She made the discovery of the child and the absorbent mind. Now, difference with Montessori to mainstream education is child-led education, the choice of materials, the activities, encouraging independence, learning freedom to move around, self-discipline, kindness through sharing, caring of another, respect of self, others, and your environment. Right. So I'm a big, strong believer that images speak louder than words. So I have a few photos. Oops. There we go. Mixed age groups working together. So not necessarily that you go into mainstream 5-year-olds to 5-year-olds, 3-year-olds, 3-year-olds. No, we mix the older children with the younger children. Why? Because we often find that children learn from each other. Here they are helping each other, an older child. All these practical skills, again, mixed age groups. If it works. Oh, oops. Here you find one of our older children. The little one didn't want to eat, but she wanted the older child to feed her quite happily. Oops. And here you go. They were doing an activity of folding, working together. Now, what I find so beautiful about this image is how the children come together, and you see the joy on the faces, the concentration, and that is what Montessori is about. It's about following the child, letting them experience things. So, independent learning. Now, we're not called teachers. Montessori, we're called directresses, we're called guides. Why are we guides? Because the material teaches, and we guide the child through observations. And here we go, some more photos. Every child, you can see children working at their own individual choice of work, and we do call it the child's work. You see little ones working side by side. And practical life. What is practical life for Montessori? Well, it's a purpose-built activity that develops motor control and coordination and develops independence, concentration, and a sense of responsibility. The exercises in practical life cover two main areas of development: care of self and care of the environment. As you can see, one of our little ones cutting up her snack in her own purpose-built kitchen. Everything will be child-sized in a Montessori nursery because you find that it is there for the children. There you go, rolling up a mat, which might seem simple to somebody else, but it actually requires a lot of concentration. There we go, tying up, learning how to buckle, practical life skills, and obviously playing a bit of cuckoo. Again, transferring, hand-eye coordination, transferring of water skills, and it goes on. Now, what is sensorial? What does a sensorial material do? Sensorial activities are used in Montessori to learn to help children in discrimination and order. They also help broaden and refine a child's senses. When a child combines Montessori design materials with sensorial work, it helps them become more logical, perceptive, and aware. Here we go. Now here you can see children using knob cylinders and knobless cylinders both together. And you can see one of the children, she's actually checking through height, matching them up through width, and the concentration, which is key. You always see these children, they're always concentrating and working. There we go. And then you can see again, you can do a variety of exercises, but everything that always strikes me the most here is the concentration on these children's faces, the sense of purpose that they show. Here we go. This is the children doing the maze with the red rods. We're working on balance and concentration once more. Now, this work is built by the children. See? Now, this is an interesting exercise. It's funny how adults and children think differently. When I had seen this exercise and I'd seen the paper with it, I thought, right, you're going to build one on top of the other, and it goes higher and higher. This child was much brighter than me, because they always teach us a lot, and she actually decided to put them side by side so it looked exactly like it was in the cardboard. And I thought, yeah, why didn't I think of that? So again, we can learn a lot from our children. Again, this one here, not an easy task, believe you me, very specific. There are a lot of angles. If you do not put it together correctly, it will fall. These children concentrate. They either work on their own or they work in a team setting. Again, it was Christmas time. Even the young ones joined in, built a tree out of the different materials, and then he decided to get all the bits out of the different cupboards, puzzles and that, and just decorate the tree. Creativity and problem solving. The Montessori environment promotes problem solving and critical thinking skills in a variety of ways. With each piece of material that is presented to the child, there are problem solving skills that are required to master at work. So here we go. This is the Roman arch. And then again, you have to problem solve. There are specific pieces that go together. Oh, and as you can see, I want to go back one. All right, so you see a little 3-year-old putting this together. All she did was look at a design, and there you go, off she went. The limitations that we give our children are our limitations, not theirs. As you can see again. And they just love working. And again, you'll see that we're not sitting at tables, or we're not at desks all the time. They like to lie on the floor and just enjoy. Numeracy and maths. Well, Montessori math curriculum is one of the best examples of unique beauty in Montessori materials. Then the math materials continue to prepare the child for later learning. Then they use concrete materials to introduce abstract concepts and give the sequential understanding of mathematical concepts. So as you'll see, oops, here we go. So in preparation, here we go. Right, here are the math, got the rods again, and you can see them going up in steps. This is the beginning of the mathematical equipment. And what they do is they're teaching quantity. Montessori is very much about quantity before the number. Again, then we have the sandpaper numerals for learning ready for writing. And then different activities that we prepare, and the children can actually choose how they place the numbers and the quantities. Again, the spindle box, learning our numbers up to 9. Then we go on to doing our team boards. Again, you can see working at a table, working the floor, wherever you're most comfortable. Again, the young ones working number 10s, teen numbers. And again, you see that a lot of the time you don't see a teacher sitting by a directress sitting by the children, because we like them to work on their own. Again, you can make the equipment out of anything. Creativity is key in Montessori. Children learn the numbers of quantities. Again, our fraction triangles. So again, these children at a very young age are learning fractions. These are used for our language skills, as well as our three-dimensional shapes. And here we go, language. What is language? Well, it's a physical science, an introduction to language. Language is a system of symbols with an agreed-upon meaning. Okay. So here we go. Language is a means of communication, ideas or feelings, use of conventionalized sounds and signs, thus being spoken and written language. Right, this is one I love. I asked the children to work on house. We were talking about positional language. In front of, behind, underneath, on top. But the children decided, I said, well, here's the house. I'd like you to work together. And I'd like you to set up the house as a group activity and see how you'd like to decorate it. This then encourages the children to have a conversation. When I come back, I see that everything's outside. The house put to one side, and there they are, as you can well see. When I said, oh, what's happened here? The house is too small, they said. The house is too small. I don't understand. Could you explain? Well, we're having a party. So, it's too small in the house, so we took it outside. Logic, of course. So, very good. Again, learning how to write. You have your language boards, you follow them, you trace them with your hand, and then you get the sand out, and then they trace preparation for writing. Whoops. I will get there. Oh, here we go. Oh, well, I haven't got very long, everyone, so I knew I wouldn't. So I'm just going to zoom by. I mean, I have loads more photos, which are going to show where we're working. Go to the library. I'm just going to try and go very quickly through this for you. I knew I needed at least an hour. Something I'm very passionate about is education and children. But what I want to get to are the quotes. The world around us, science, learning about the world, where animals come from, arts and crafts. We take this very seriously, as you can see. Expression. Music. Now, I didn't have enough time to put music on, but we do have one where the children are discovering the different sounds. And again, you'll see that they're all sitting, not specifically in any routine, they're just sitting around. And you'll find that our teachers, we all work together. Go outdoors often, fresh air, discovery again, picnics, counting again, have fun, balancing. Now, this is one photo that I particularly love. This is one I call happiness. Happiness because you can see in there the teachers as well were running in the water. There's no such thing as that we are better than or bigger than. We are equals. In Montessori, it's very much about respect. Respect the child, respect their beliefs, come to an understanding. If you do that, then the world's your oyster. Quotes from Montessori. Never help a child with a task at which he feels he can succeed. Very true. A lot of time as parents, we feel that we can come along and we correct things, so we do things for the children. We cannot do that. We need to let them grow. Child, you'll be surprised what your children can achieve. And let us treat them children, therefore, with all the kindness which we would wish to help develop in them. Again, very true. If you treat someone with respect and kindness, therefore you receive the same, doesn't matter the age. Free the child's potential and you will transform him into the world. Maria Montessori very much believes that the children are our future. I believe the children are our future. And as you can see, a bit more about outdoors, learning about nature. And that's Fred and Bob. And we'll try and move it quickly forward, and then we'll come to finalise. No, it won't. Oh, there we go. Children experiencing, building meaningful relationships. There we go. Friendships, bonds. And then, after such a busy day, some much-needed R&R. Okay. So again, Maria Montessori believed, and I'm going to cut this very short because I can see the red light, and I'm worried about the trap door. So what I would say is, with the children, what I find is they're just amazing. And Maria Montessori put it as, why do we let nature develop naturally? You know, you get a caterpillar, eventually develops into a beautiful butterfly. It takes its time, yes. Why then with children do we use them like a piece of clay and try and mold them into something that we want? Let them develop naturally. You'll be amazed at what your children can achieve. They are amazing. Thank you.
First of all, I must begin this by saying I didn't want to come to Gibraltar to live. 10 years ago, I was happily settled into life in West Yorkshire on an extended career break owing to the arrival of our first 2 sons. We were living in our forever family home. We'd moved around quite a lot since starting a family. We started off in Yorkshire, moved to Lancashire, up to County Durham, and then back down to Yorkshire, all because of my husband's work. And we were in our 5th home in 5 years and had no intentions of moving anywhere anytime soon. It had taken quite a while to get established where we were. We'd appealed to get our eldest son into a really good, newly built school just over the fields from where we lived. Neither of us are from that part of the world, and we had no close family or close friends nearby to support us. It had taken a year of going to toddler groups and a year of my eldest son being at school before I'd chipped through and managed to get invited out for coffee by one of the other mums instead of just a cheery hello at the school gates. We were an hour's drive from my parents as well, so that worked well for weekly visits and babysitting. We were sorted. That was the end of 2008, when my husband came home from work one day and said, "We're moving to Gibraltar." "No, we're not," was my answer. Why would I go there? I knew nothing about the place, and we were settled. We didn't want to move anywhere. He explained, though, that if we didn't move, there was a very good chance he was going to lose his job. And as he wouldn't be able to get another job in his field where we lived, we were going to have to move anyway. So the deal was done, even though I'd offered to work night shifts in a 24-hour supermarket to supplement the income. So we made our first scheduled visit to Gibraltar in January 2009. It was for me to see Gibraltar for the first time, to find somewhere to live and to look at schools for our eldest. Before we flew here, I was Googling Gibraltar like mad. There wasn't as much online about Gibraltar back then as there is now. All I could find out was that it was a huge, great big rock. The policemen and women looked quite familiar. There were red phone boxes, apes and fish and chips. And there were some very shiny apartments for sale in a place called Ocean Village, which was a far cry from our 3-bed semi on the outskirts of Wakefield. We left the snow behind us and our children. As we set off on that first visit, my dad battled up country lanes to get our eldest to school, which turned out to be closed because of the bad weather, and we arrived in rather warmer climes, but under the cover of darkness. The following morning, I looked out of my hotel room window at the Elliott and could see the densely packed buildings in front of me and this huge, great big rock above. I didn't know what to make of the place at all. That first day, we were taken to view 17 different properties, both here in Gibraltar and over the border in Spain. I ruled out Spain pretty much straight away. The commute for my husband, for one, the language barrier, I only did French at A-level, not Spanish, and the fact that there were no pavements outside any of the properties. How would I take my toddler for a walk with no pavements? And how on earth would I make friends as a stay-at-home mum? Gibraltar won over on every score except the housing, but I'd take a community I could interact with easily over a house with a garden any day. Whilst travelling around with the relocation people, I asked what facilities there were for families with young children in Gibraltar. "Oh, there aren't any," was the answer. "Oh, well, it's going to be boring then," was my thoughts on the matter. We found somewhere to live, an apartment of course, so goodbye garden and garage. And my husband moved over in the May. I followed with the boys in August that year once school had finished and we'd packed up our home and rented it out. Before the removal men left that day, after unloading countless boxes, I asked them to give me a quote for how much it was going to cost us to move back in 2 years' time. That was my deal, 2 years only. I started saving straight away. Thankfully, my parents came over with us, helped us with the unpacking and the boys. Without their help, I think I would have been on the first monarch out of here. The first thing I noticed about Gibraltar, apart from the heat and the blue sky, was the bureaucracy. Summer hours, endless queues in hot, sweaty offices with restless children, and always, it seemed, getting to the front of the queue only to find out I had one piece of paperwork missing and I had to come back the next day and do it all again. I wasn't falling in love with the place. We heard our son had got into St Mary's first school on the last day of the school summer holidays. I had just one day to go and buy his uniform before he started school on the Monday. There's nothing like a last-minute dash for uniform to add to the stress levels. At the end of that first day, though, I was approached outside school by a mum who was full of apologies because her son had taken some birthday party invitations into school and they weren't expecting my son to be in the class. She said, "Don't worry, tomorrow there'll be an invitation," and sure enough there was. Within a week, we were immersed in a full-on Gibraltarian children's party in a social club with the whole family there, and we were answering a million questions. Who we were, where we'd come from, what we were doing here, etc. We felt included and wanted, and that was really nice. Then a couple of weeks later, my son's teacher, Miss Daly, who is legendary in our house, took me aside at the end of school and said, "Now, Mrs. Weston, we've settled your son into school. What can I do to help you and your husband settle into life in Gibraltar?" I was astonished. In our 1 year in a UK school, I'd seen my son's teacher twice by appointment only. And so, this huge difference between the UK and Gibraltar was amazing, and our gradual immersion into the Gibraltarian community had begun. Now, remember what I said about when we came to look around and I was told there were no facilities for families with young children? Well, that was clearly wrong. There was a toddler group at Europa, the Monkey Capers, and another one at Chiltern Court, and there were a couple of musical groups for children too. It did take a bit of detective work to find them because Facebook and social media wasn't quite what it is today. It was more a case of looking on notice boards and word of mouth to find out what was happening. Now, along with a couple of friends who moved to Gibraltar that same summer, with the same work relocation, we decided to set up a toddler group of our own. We didn't think it was fair that the MOD should have to provide the only toddler groups in Gibraltar, and we wanted to create a community one too. One of those friends had an association with Holy Trinity Cathedral, and they very kindly offered us some room at the back of the church for storage and space to run the playgroup. We started small. We asked just a few families we knew to come along so we could wrangle the toddlers and figure out the logistics of keeping toddlers into a small part of a very large church. That was in Easter 2010. In September 2010, we opened to the public, and it took off. Trinity Toddlers Craft and Play was born. Some weeks, we got in excess of 35 families turning up. Many of them had multiple children, so you can imagine the level of noise that we would have on Tuesdays or Wednesday mornings. I spent 6 years as a volunteer with Trinity Toddlers before we handed it over to its current leader, Gemma, who has taken it from strength to strength in various locations, and it's now based in the Children's Centre in Mid Harbours. During that time, my deadline of 2 years had been and gone. Work was going well for my husband, we were settled again as a family, and baby boy number 3 arrived in the summer of 2011. Not long after his arrival, I was approached by Ewan McLean, the minister at St Andrew's Church of Scotland, to ask me if I wanted a voluntary job. My mum's from Scotland, and although I was brought up a Methodist, when I set foot in St Andrews, I felt like I'd gone home. I spent many childhood summer holidays in Glasgow visiting my gran and went to her church on Sundays. So St Andrews became a bit of a home from home, a sanctuary, something familiar when everything around me was unfamiliar when we first arrived. Ewan knew of my background as a broadcast journalist in local radio, and he was looking for someone to help work as a press officer for a charity he was involved with. I started doing a bit of media work then for the Vine Trust Gibraltar, which was behind a team of volunteers who travelled out to Tanzania to help build schools and medical facilities and homes. And as well as that, they were converting an old Royal Navy ship into a floating hospital, which was eventually transported to Lake Victoria in Tanzania to help offer medical care to the communities around the lake who otherwise wouldn't receive it. It felt good to be using my brain again for something other than running a home, a family and a toddler group. Little did Ewan know what he'd started though, as it got me thinking about a return to work. I wasn't sure how I'd do it with 3 children and a husband who works long hours and is often away overseas and no other family support, but I started thinking about it more and more. While I wholeheartedly believe I did the right thing, giving up work to look after my family, it does dent your self-confidence and being able to do things outside the home when you stay away from work for a long time. A few years ago, in fact, a few days ago, I would never have imagined I would be standing here speaking to you. Following on from my work with the Vine Trust, Polly Lavarello, the creator and editor of Mum on the Rock, contacted me and asked if I'd like to write some articles for her online magazine. It was quite a change from what I'd been used to. I was trained in the BBC and at university to write for radio and television, and to write for print is a completely different discipline and pushed me right out of my comfort zone. As did going to report and mingling with politicians and important people that I wouldn't normally have encountered in my life at a toddler group. I felt a bit like a fish out of water after more than a decade at home with the children. Then a job was advertised on Facebook for a newsreader for GBC television. One of the girls who'd started Trinity Toddlers with me tagged me in the post, so I applied. I had nothing to lose. I got the job. I started reading the news on Newswatch in April 2017, and I absolutely loved it. Being part of a team again, being Lindsay again, and not just mummy, was a huge adjustment after 13 years at home. I was made to feel so welcome at GBC. I felt I was a valued member of the team, even though I just walked through the door, and so many of my colleagues were GBC veterans. 6 months later, Radio Gibraltar advertised a part-time weekend presenter job. I applied for that, and I got that one too. It was to be the Sunday breakfast presenter, and that was a whole new experience for me. When I worked at BBC Radio Sheffield, my last station before having children, it was in a full-time reporter or producer role, working towards the following morning's breakfast programme or that evening's drive time programme. I also worked as a reporter in a district office in Doncaster, Rotherham and Chesterfield, effectively in a broom cupboard at the back of the town hall. It meant I had to think on my feet, generate stories and get contacts so I could get good stories on the radio. Despite all of that work, I'd never done much presentation other than as one half of a 2-presenter NewsHour show, and I certainly didn't know how to drive a radio studio desk. All of that had to be absorbed before I started my first show in November 2017. I love my job as a radio presenter. It feels like I'm back doing what I was meant to do. But there was something missing. What I loved most of all when I was a reporter was being out in the field meeting people, helping them to tell their stories, giving them a voice to promote their cause, be it a charity or an awareness campaign or whatever. I couldn't commit to a full-time reporter job now with my family commitments, but I could do it on my own. With the support of my family, I embarked on a new project, Gibraltar Stories, an audio podcast. My husband and the boys gave me the moral support, and my brother has given me tech support, and without that, I wouldn't be here today. So thank you both. So often during my time here, I've come across stories and events which I would have given my eye teeth for when I was a district reporter sitting in a broom cupboard. Life stories, historical events, community initiatives, all of which I would have loved to have covered as a reporter. Finally, last summer, I heard of something which I just had to take further. I read that this year is the 50th anniversary of the frontier closure. I'm ashamed to admit that we'd lived here in Gibraltar for 5 years before I even heard of it happening. If I hadn't heard of it, I bet there's an awful lot of people out there who haven't heard of it either. I get really frustrated when I see Gibraltar described as this slice of kitsch Britishness, all red phone boxes and fish and chips. And the longer I'm here, the more I learn about Gibraltar, and there's still so much still to discover. The tunnels, the history, the sieges, all these things that we take for granted as part of our everyday life. I feel passionate that the real Gibraltar should be out there for the world to see. I want to tell real stories, and there are so many. The people who've represented Gibraltar on the world stage, those who contribute to the fact that Gib punches above its weight in so many ways, the stories of bravery, of history, which is either unknown beyond these shores or simply forgotten. That is my Gibraltar story, my gift to Gibraltar. The place I didn't want to come to, but which welcomed me with open arms and allowed me to make it my home. Thank you.